It was just another evening, quiet like so many before it. My husband sat at his desk, engrossed in his work. His laptop's blue glow reflected on his face, a face that barely looked up to acknowledge my presence. This was the norm in our marriage now. Predictable, steady, but missing the spark that had once made my heart race. I often told myself this was stability, yet a sense of emptiness had begun to creep in. Our neighborhood was peaceful. Rows of identical houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and polite waves from neighbors who rarely stopped to chat. I spent my evenings by the window, sipping tea and watching the world outside. That's when I first noticed him, my neighbor. He had moved in a few months ago, but I hadn't paid much attention. Tall, confident, and with an energy that seemed to light up the space around him, he was different from everyone else. Our interactions had been brief, a polite hello, a nod, or a quick smile. But one evening, as I watered the plants in my yard, I caught his gaze. His eyes were steady, not intrusive, but attentive, as if he saw something others had long overlooked. My heart raced, a reaction I hadn't felt in years. From that day on, I found myself noticing him more. The way he jogged in the evenings, the way he laughed when talking to others. There was an ease about him, a contrast to the monotony I felt at home. One evening, while taking a bath, I left the small bathroom window slightly open to let in the cool air. As I rinsed my hair, a feeling of awareness prickled my skin. I glanced toward the window and thought I saw movement, a fleeting shadow. My heart pounded as I quickly finished and wrapped myself in a towel. Had someone been watching? Later that evening, as I stepped out to check the mail, our paths crossed. He stood in his driveway, his gaze meeting mine. It wasn't apologetic or awkward, just calm and intense. A shiver ran through me, a mix of embarrassment and something I couldn't name. I hurried back inside, my heart racing. The days that followed were filled with tension. Every glance, every casual exchange with him carried an unspoken weight. One afternoon, as I watered the plants, he approached. Leaning casually against the fence, he said, "You always seem to be out here when I am." His tone was light, but his eyes held a deeper meaning. I laughed nervously, brushing off his comment, but the heat rising in my cheeks betrayed me. The turning point came one evening when he knocked on my door. He held a small stack of books. "I thought you might like these," he said, his smile disarming. Hesitantly, I let him in, telling myself it was just a neighborly gesture. We sat in the living room, talking about mundane things, books, the neighborhood, the weather. But beneath every word was a current of electricity. His voice was calm, but his eyes never left mine. At one point, he leaned closer, his fingers brushing mine. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. The rational part of my mind screamed to stop, to remember my husband, my vows, the life we had built. But in that moment, none of it mattered. When his lips met mine, it was as if the world around me melted away. It was reckless, dangerous, and intoxicating. The next morning, guilt weighed heavy on me. My husband sat across the table, sipping his coffee, completely unaware. He asked about my plans for the day, his tone casual and distant. I couldn't meet his eyes. Days passed, and I avoided the neighbor, drawing the curtains and keeping to myself. But my husband began to notice the cracks. "Is everything okay?" he asked one evening, concern etched on his face. I lied, but poorly. The cracks widened. Then one day, he found a misplaced book, one of the neighbors. "Where did this come from?" he asked, his voice sharp. I froze, unable to come up with a convincing answer. The truth was written on my face, and he didn't need me to say it. His expression shifted to heartbreak, and all he could say was, "Why?" The silence that followed was unbearable. The damage was done, and there was no going back. My husband's quiet pain was louder than any words. The neighbor, too, retreated into his own world, as if knowing the chaos he had been part of was too much to face. That evening, I stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The life I had taken for granted was in pieces, and I was left with the weight of my choices. The thrill, the fascination, the fleeting moments of feeling alive, none of it was worth the wreckage I had caused. In the stillness, I realized something. Sometimes, the things we chase in moments of weakness can cost us everything we truly value. And the hardest part isn't the loss. It's learning to face yourself in the aftermath.